Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today for 72 Tips for Academic Libraries in 72 Minutes. My name is Megan Lotz, and I'll be presenting your first 12 tips. However, before we get started, I would like to extend a hearty thanks to Ramon Robinson, who brought this amazing group of people together, which in truth, I'm honored to be a part of. And thank you to Angela for being here today and joining us all. But also a thanks to ALA Editions, who's helped support us all as authors, including sharing our messages in the format of physical books, presentations, and more. Again, my name is Megan Lotz, and I'm the art librarian at Rutgers, the State University of New Jersey. And today I'll be sharing 12 tips for creativity, programming, and engagement. When it comes to libraries and many civic organizations, there's no question we will likely never have enough money to fulfill all of our stakeholder needs. However, we can use creativity and playful engagement, both internally and externally, to learn from the past while staying in the present, which can open us up to what is possible, as opposed to the ideas, we've done that before, or that would never work here. In 1989, the movie The Field of Dreams helped popularize the phrase, "if you build it, they will come" concept. Yet, unfortunately for libraries, this is not the case. Even with the best people, places, spaces, resources, and all the money in the world, we cannot assume our stakeholders will come to us. Therefore, we need to meet patrons at their point of need and make sure that we are fulfilling their needs and wants, not what we think they need or want. But also, let's include our stakeholders from the get-go, as this can help when it comes to getting buy-in, which we can ensure will then help get the most impact for all of our hard work and every dollar that we spend. And again, I want to reiterate, we can't assume our patrons will come to us or that they will tell us what they really need. Therefore, we need to learn more about what makes our patrons tick, how they experience life in libraries. And this information can help direct our priorities and provide insights for how we engage and educate our stakeholders. For example, at Rutgers, I'm a subject specialist who supports individuals that are in 3 different academic schools, and we are located in New Brunswick across 5 campuses, which are also split down the middle by the Raritan River. To put it mildly, our campus is big, and as many Rutgers community members will tell you, our bus system can be trying, and that's the polite way of putting it. Therefore, to get into the flow of my users, I spend 2 hours each week in the lobbies of the departments with whom I work so that they don't have to come to the art library to receive support. This has increased my overall reference statistics, but also this project has spawned many cross-disciplinary collaborations, which is important for academic libraries and a place where we can truly shine. The key for any library when it comes to impact is to find partners outside of your organization who have common goals, as they will help you share your message. And this is an easy way to influence impact and engage wider audiences. But also for me at Rutgers, I don't do anything without partners. In part, I have no easy access to money, but I know who on campus has money. And most of those people know that the art library is a trusted partner. Therefore, it's a win-win for everyone, especially our stakeholders. A wise painting professor once told me, you keep an ideas book or a journal where you keep your reflections or thoughts, as this is a place that you visit when you're having a long week or looking for an unexpected solution to a problem. This might be a physical space or a virtual space, but ideally it's one space or place. And often with my patrons, we create idea books using scrap paper, paint chips, and brass fasteners. And this is an activity that you can do with your students. It doesn't take much time and it doesn't break the bank. And it provides a space where they can keep their notes while they're researching or coming up with ideas in their daily work lives in the libraries. And it's important, if you have an impactful or successful program, do not run it into the ground. At Rutgers, we often held an edible book festival. Roughly during the 3rd year of hosting this event, I started to notice that the fun or the buzz was waning. Therefore, I knew it was time to put this event back on the shelf for a few years and replace it with something new. And so we did, and it's helped create buzz, and now people are asking for it again and wanting more. But also, keep in mind, college campuses are fluid spaces, and every 4 or 5 years, we have a whole new set of stakeholders who don't know what academic libraries are about. So most important, never leave a resource, space, place, or employee behind, and keep up with publicizing what is possible in libraries, even when it's nothing new, and especially when you think that someone probably already knows this. When I got to Rutgers, I knew creating an exhibit space was key for the art library, as there's never enough space on a college campus when it comes to exhibiting our stakeholders' work. In truth, exhibition spaces can be impactful for any library, as highlighting what our community members do keeps them and their friends and their communities coming back for more. However, be mindful when creating these types of spaces, as censorship is on the rise. Make sure you have the policies and procedures to protect the artist and the libraries. And even more important, make sure that your practices follow what your policies say they do. And that make sure that you aren't having to do this and create these policies and practices as you go along. It will make, I promise you, for a better experience. If you want to make impact, consider creating life-size cardboard cutouts of yourself. This is a great way to be present in your departments or other campus spaces 24/7. But I also have tabletop cardboard cutouts that attend events when I'm unable. These cutouts also have library swag, and they're the gateway to the real deal, which is me. But in truth, in general, the cutouts are fun. People love taking selfies with them, and these buy street credit and goodwill, which is key for any library. At Rutgers, I've created two versions of the Art Library coloring book, and in truth, these are self-directed learning experiences, which are like the content covered in a 50-minute one-shot bibliographic session. But also, these coloring books are like a zine. And zines are an incredible resource to teach with and can help you share your message. Most students will walk by a library brochure, which we spend a lot of money on creating and printing. However, when they're given a zine, many of us are curious about the gift, what it means. They look at how it was made, they unfold it. They think about how they might apply their own ideas. Often, when I give people my business card, which is a zine, they say, "This is amazing. I want to make one for myself." They say this because a business card is a piece of nice cardstock with a logo. But a zine or a micro portfolio tells a story. And if it's a good story, it means you are left wanting more. And seriously, when have you ever given your business card to someone and they say, "Wow, I need to make one of these"? That's the greatest compliment. In my own work with creativity and play, I receive an incredible amount of praise. However, I also use techniques that are non-traditional for some libraries, and I am often also met with naysayers. In truth, that's okay. Good art and libraries are spaces that make us think, ask questions, and we want to challenge ideas. Therefore, if you've got people asking questions or concerned about your work, well, you're probably doing something right. But also, if you are regularly reflecting on and assessing the impact of your work, then you never will have a problem. Creativity and play, in truth, sells itself and will provide incredible impact if you take the time to assess it. Finally, I want to encourage every one of you here today to consider engaging play and creativity at work. Although it might seem odd, or again, open up a can of questions, give it a try, see what happens. You might be surprised. But also, something as simple as a button maker can provide playful and creative opportunities when it comes to teaching copyright, finding images, visual literacy, and more. At the Rutgers Art Library, we've been making buttons since 2016, and we've made over 48,000 buttons and partnered with over 460 organizations throughout the Rutgers campuses. And in truth, it's the button maker that gets us in the door, and it's the creative and playful learning that takes care of the rest. In fact, it's the playfulness and the creativity that gets us invited back for more. All of this work with button making over the past 8 years has cost us less than $4,000. Yet it has gained the libraries an incredible amount of goodwill, over the top impact, and in some cases, it has gotten us seats at the table where we've been trying to dine for years. Finally, I would like to say, follow your passions. Your impact will show this. Be yourself and don't be afraid to take calculated risks. And keep Kleenex and candy in your office, just in case. Thank you all for your time and attention today. You can learn more about my research and books via the ALA Editions website. Also, you can find my contact info and learn more about my life as a librarian and as an artist at www.meganlotz.com. Now we'll move on to our next speaker, Anne Medaille, who will be providing tips on fostering collaboration, self-regulation, and motivation in learners. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Megan. Yeah, my name is Anne Medaille. I'm the Director of Research and Instructional Services at the University of Nevada, Reno. And my book is about learning theory and about the practical ways we can apply learning theory in our libraries. So if you've heard of or if you've engaged with concepts like constructivism or collaboration or motivation, inquiry, play, self-efficacy, you've been engaging with learning theory, and it might not just be in a classroom context. We do it when we create our spaces, we create events, we create exhibits. We're doing it all the time because libraries are centers of learning. So I'm going to focus on three areas in particular today through the tips that I have to share with you. And my first area is collaboration, because learning is very often a collaborative process. We learn by interacting with others. So we can foster collaboration by forming communities of practice centered around library resources and services, such as making, robotics, and design. So a community of practice is simply when people get together and they learn in the course of doing an activity. So it could be a work group, you do it at your work, it could be, your church, it could be a club. And we know that these kind of groups meet in our libraries all the time, but we can form them too, as centered around the things that we have going on in our libraries. So we can make them ourselves to bring people together. Next, foster collaboration by providing library spaces that enable patrons to gather for debate and discussion, and incorporate panels and small group discussions into classes and workshops. So dialogue is a really great way that we learn from each other. And when we're engaged in dialogue, it's a back and forth, but hopefully we're doing it with an open mind, with the idea that we're going to learn from each other. And it's just so important to have dialogue to build healthy communities. So we can simply provide spaces, which is, we have spaces and we make sure that there are, let's say, podiums for speakers or technology that's necessary for this kind of debate and discussion. Or we can actually moderate these things too in classes or events. So we just want to moderate with the idea that it stays focused, that the conversation is inclusive, that people engage in a spirit of openness. Next, foster collaboration by providing information that allows learners to locate like-minded people in the library with whom they can connect. So people are so hungry for real connection with others. We can really help foster that connection and use it to promote learning. So maybe maybe we are having activities and we bring people together through our publicity, but when we know of events going on in the library, we can publicize them through, old-fashioned flyers and signage, through our websites, through our phones, whatever it is. We should always try to help people come together in our spaces. It's very meaningful for them. Next, foster collaboration by using technology to create opportunities for group discussion and social learning when hosting events and workshops online. So, as with COVID, we had to move a lot of our events online. And now that those days are fortunately past, we've returned to a lot of in-person stuff, but we still hold lots of things online, and we have to, for reasons of accessibility, in some cases, convenience, what have you. But whenever you have something online, an online event, you just want to make sure that you're also providing some kind of forum for people to connect with each other, whether it be a chat forum, whether it be a whiteboard, whether it be some kind of discussion place where they can connect. So providing that online interaction is really important. Okay, so moving on from collaboration, I want to talk now about self-regulation. So self-regulation relates to the process of mobilizing our thoughts, feelings, and actions in order to achieve learning goals. So basically, when we're self-regulating, we're planning for learning, we're monitoring our learning, we're reflecting on learning, we're managing our time, we're getting help, we're doing all of these things in a way that we're actively engaged with the learning process. So my first tip here related to self-regulation is to promote self-regulatory skills during library workshops by incorporating opportunities for learners to set goals for what they hope to learn at the beginning and to reflect upon what they learned at the end. So we can't assume that people are doing this or they know how to do it. And, we're always so busy. We're always running to the next thing that often we don't have time to reflect. So encourage people. Okay, wait, what am I hoping to get out of this? What did I learn at the end? Let me reflect on how what I just learned I'm going to use in my life. So really incorporating reflection anytime we can is important. Next, promote self-regulatory and metacognitive skills by creating and sharing templates that learners can use during research, media, and maker tasks. So metacognition means thinking about thinking. So we always want to come back to whoever it is we're talking to in the library. What's your thinking? How's your thinking going? Are you aware of your thinking? What are you going to do next? What's helping you with this? Why are you making these choices? And sometimes a physical or a digital handout or a template can help, with some question prompts, can help guide people to come back to their thinking and become more aware of it. That's really important for self-regulation. Next, promote self-regulatory skills by incorporating into library events that teach stress management, time management, and productivity. So we don't always think of these as being the province of libraries. We think of our research skills or making skills or media skills or whatever. But these are really important too, because they go hand in hand with all of those other skills. Research assignments, for example, can be overwhelming if you don't have good time management skills, or if you get stressed by the scope of a making or a media project. So we want to incorporate those skills in, these really important self-regulatory skills in with our other skills that we're teaching. Next, promote self-regulatory skills by teaching learners how to use tools such as planners, schedules, search logs, information search records, source journals, and graphic organizers. So all of these external kinds of tools can really help us regulate our learning. How am I going to use a planner to help me? A schedule, a log. How am I going to keep track of things? Can I use a table or a chart to help me out? We have to teach learners how to use these things whenever we can. Next, my last set of tips here has to do with motivation. And motivation is critical. So motivation is simply a learner's willingness to engage in an activity, to engage in a goal-directed activity. Are they willing to do it? If they're not motivated, they won't do it. So we want to appeal to their motivation. And motivation is complicated because it ties into your interests, your values, your beliefs, your personality. There's a whole lot of stuff that factors in. One way we can foster motivation during instruction when we're teaching is by ensuring that tasks are suited to learners' abilities and that they're capable of succeeding at them. So we want tasks not to be too difficult, because if it's too difficult, you get discouraged. If it's too easy, you get bored. You want it to be right down the middle. And if we're teaching tasks that are difficult, which we often are, we just want to make sure that we divide it into steps or chunk, so that it's manageable and people don't just get overwhelmed and then they tune out and become demotivated. Next, foster motivation by encouraging learners to create things in the library that they can share with family, friends, and others. So being creative, well, that's motivating right there. And then when they can make things, let's say, that tie into their values, that's really important. When they can share them with family and friends, ties into their social networks, all of this can be very meaningful and motivating. Next, foster motivation by engaging learners in projects that appeal to their innate desire to help others or make a difference in their communities. So we all need meaning and purpose in our lives, and we're hungry for it. So when we can connect learning to those things, people will be so motivated, especially if you can even engage with outside partners in the community to do projects that involve your patrons in some way. And then if you do have a chance to work with outside partners in your community, give learners an opportunity to share their work in your library through presentations or exhibits. Again, so motivating and so meaningful for them. And then finally, my last tip regarding motivation is foster motivation to learn by providing support in the library for completing non-traditional projects and assignments that appeal to learners' personal interests and strengths. So what I mean by that is like, not another boring research paper. That people want other options. First of all, they want autonomy over their learning, but they want to do something different, to do projects that maybe tie into their talents a little bit. So we want to be able to let people know that we have the tools, the technology to support these different kinds of projects and assignments, that we can help them with it. And then if we're working with teachers, let those teachers know, yeah, we can support that media assignment. Sure, we can help out with that. So that's also very motivating. Great. And then the Librarian's Guide to Learning Theory, Practical Applications in Library Settings is my book on this topic, and I have a previous book on visual literacy as well. But we're so involved in learning. We're helping people learn all the time. It's just what we do. It's who we are. Thanks so much.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. My name is Zoe Maughan, and I am the project manager for the Vietnamese Portland Memory History Community Archival Project at Lewis and Clark College here in Portland, Oregon. And today I'm going to be presenting 12 tips for diversifying archival collections. So my first tip is to reflect on and center your why. So ask yourself, why am I doing this project? Who is it serving? And are those people included in the process? And this is something you can approach as an ongoing practice in your project as your mission evolves, as your project grows. And when you're feeling burnt out or defeated or wondering what your next steps look like, this is something you can return to remember why you're doing this work. Next, my next tip is to acknowledge your positionality from the beginning. So your positionality is the web of identities that creates you and affects how you work with and connect with others. Be honest with yourself about your position in relation to the work that you're doing, and when you're able to engage with the community from this place of humility and honesty, you're going to be able to build stronger relationships. And if you're not a member of the community that you're working to represent, this is really important to acknowledge and consistently engage with opportunities to build your cultural knowledge and humility. Next, know your community and your collections, and then use that information to identify gaps in your collections. So don't try to create a collection that duplicates one that is already meeting the needs of the community. Figure out what is central to the community and if parts of that are not represented in your collections or other community collections. Ask yourself how you can improve this representation and better serve patrons. What resources don't exist that should or that people have asked you about? Again, this is where you can center the needs of the community being represented. Next, you can collect oral histories as a valuable way to add depth to historical collections. So the archival project I work on is primarily an oral history project, and oral history offers this unique opportunity to capture personal experiences and memories of historical events. And it can be really easy for these types of experiences to be left out of the historical narrative, and oral history offers us a way to incorporate them into our histories. And this can help our users to better understand history and to better connect with those stories and ideas. Next, look to community archives practices. So you can include a much wider selection of materials through collaborations with community organizations. And this is a time to reflect and consider how you might incorporate community archives values into a traditional archival setting. So while you might be working again within this traditional archival setting, there are community archives values that you can draw from. Work to build mutually beneficial relationships with the community and try to understand and work in service of those specific needs. And involve the community in decision-making whenever possible. Even when an action doesn't result in new additions to your collections, collaboration can go a long way in broadening access to knowledge and materials. You don't have to be the holder of the materials to help increase this access, so collaboration is key. Next, include dual language material if you can. So don't ignore the language of the community that you're representing. If you're aiming to document a community that speaks a language other than English, utilize those resources at your disposal to make collections dual language as much as possible. Language matters. Don't ignore the significance of including the language of the community that you're representing. And this includes collecting dual language material, but also translating created materials so that they're truly accessible to the community. Next, decrease the backlog and add or revise descriptive metadata to improve access to materials. So creating access doesn't always mean new acquisitions. This can mean taking time to decrease your backlog and enhance collection or item description, and that can help people locate material that they might not have found before. So don't underestimate the power of a good, well-written description. And this doesn't always mean things have to be processed to a painstaking level. It can mean making sure basic metadata elements are present and consistent across the board so that your collections are more navigable. Next, create initiatives that encourage use of the collection. So creating the collection is not the last step in this process, it's really just the beginning. Once this collection exists, it's important to find ways that you can make it truly accessible and useful for the community. So this is a great way to draw attention to the collection and to new materials. This could look like curating an exhibit or a traveling exhibit, creating curricular resources that draw on the collection, keeping a blog and writing regular posts with new updates or new materials, and hosting community events that encourage engagement with the collection. Next, collect community feedback at every opportunity possible. So this doesn't always have to be a formal process, but it can be. Ask people for feedback. Hire consultants when you're able. Attend community events and network and build relationships. Sometimes you want to ask for feedback directly, and other times it might come to you more naturally as you move through the project. Never stop collecting feedback, and when you do get feedback, take the time to really take it into consideration and take the appropriate action to address it. Next is to maintain the relationships that come out of the work organically, and this is both for the sake of the project and for general community building. We really want to work to shift away from extractive practices and towards mutually beneficial ones. Again, this is where you can consider your why. It's easy for this type of work to become extractive and for us to think about what we can get out of the process. But consider why you're actually working to build increasingly representative collections and engage with the community. You can't know what they need without having these conversations. So build the relationships because you care about the work you're doing and not just to see what you can get out of it. Next is to focus on one thing at a time. So giving individual tasks attention rather than multitasking ensures that things aren't forgotten or overlooked later. It can be really tempting to complete a project as fast as possible, especially in the context of grant-funded projects. To the extent that you're able, slow down and approach things intentionally and thoughtfully. Giving yourself time and space to process and plan early in the project will save you time later. And while it's true that some processes just have to run concurrently, usually due to grant restraints, giving your full attention to individual tasks to the extent that you're able will ensure a higher quality product. And when you have to multitask, consider using a project management tool so that you can pick up where you left off and keep yourself notes. And finally, acknowledge that this work requires ongoing effort and reflection. It isn't just a box to check. This work is never done. It requires a commitment to building diverse collections and to consistent reflection on the project, on yourself, and your processes and goals are going to evolve as your projects or collections grow. You don't just check the diversity box and call it a day. This is work that you weave into your everyday practices and continually reevaluate as you learn more information. Thank you. And I am a co-author in Building Representative Community Archives, Inclusive Strategies in Practice. And this is a collection where you can look at a variety of case studies of archives in the US that are doing work to build more representative, thorough histories of US history and archival practice. Thank you, and I will pass it over to Scott.
Thank you, Zoe. My name is Scott Spicer. I'm the Media Outreach Librarian at the University of Minnesota, head of the Library Media Services, where I support, amongst other things, student-created media. Next. So like Zoe started, identity is absolutely critical for media services as well. Before you even begin to move into this area, it's really important to conduct an environmental scan of media creation support on your campus. Is there really a campus demand? And what gap would a library-based support service be actually filling? Next. Once you've defined that gap, now it's time to really define your level of media creation support per that gap on your campus. Are you going to provide high-end media support or beginner to mid-level support? Answering that question is going to determine what level of equipment that you purchase, what level of support service, what level of depth of expertise is required in order to meet those various needs. In that question will very much once again define who you are. There's a massive difference between supporting a base level digital story for a peace studies class and developing a documentary for a film studies class. Those are two totally different media service programs. So knowing who you are in that spectrum is really incredibly important. Next. Cultivate relationships with subject librarians, academic technologists, and media specialists across campus. None of these media projects can really be done by themselves. It truly does take a village. Moreover, most of these projects are interdisciplinary and they are multimodal in nature. You're going to require as many perspectives as possible at various times in order to optimize that support potential when a media project comes up. So having these relationships established, and that's why there's the outreach in my position title, Media Outreach Librarian, because our institution knew before I even arrived that this aspect of cultivating relationships, which I've now extended into our communities beyond the university, as well as the professional field, is just critically important to do this work well. Next, please. After you have a service off the ground, it's really important to develop an assessment plan for capturing data to determine the efficacy of your program and communicate the value of media projects along with the library roles and support. So media is ever-changing, like multiple aspects, but as an emergent area, and I still do believe it is an emergent area, and it will always be an emergent area. The formats are constantly changing. The equipments are constantly changing. I'm now working in virtual reality, for example. You need to be able to stay on top of what you're doing well, where you have some gaps in your service, where there's room for improvement. So having both qualitative and quantitative data methodologies should be in your plan for use in various contexts. So for example, at the end of a semester, I routinely help assignment development with instructors and I coordinate support. I will send out a survey to our faculty. Well, now we're starting to capture student experiences when they go to check out equipment. So they'll be getting various surveys and whatnot. When I do our consultations and workshops, we capture people's experiences using various approaches. All of these are in my book. Next, please. Learn key instructional design theories to better assist in curriculum development and pedagogical effectiveness of media assignments. Now, we heard a little bit about this from an expert earlier. I am a radical constructivist at heart. I believe that people should be able to communicate in whatever form that they feel most comfortable, but that doesn't work real well always for higher ed. So understanding though, whether you're more in a behaviorist where you're going to have more defined, structured type of projects, or you're going to have more open-ended projects, is really important when you're meeting with instructors, and also as importantly, when you're going to be evaluating the effectiveness of this assignment and whether they met key learning objectives, so that you can iteratively refine those assignments going forward. Next. Become knowledgeable about concepts in media, visual, oral, and digital literacy plus AI. Now on the horizon, well, now here. These are really important, and I'll be honest, I wasn't a literacies person when I first came in. All these have, information literacy especially, but all these various literacies, they have their own kind of histories. And we heard from somebody who wrote a book on visual literacy earlier. And it's important, but what I've learned is that becoming conversant in these various literacies, they give you a vocabulary from which to understand your work. In my case, from which to understand the pedagogical effectiveness of these various communication types within a media project. So I can pull out the nutrients of the visual aspects when I understand visual literacy, or I can pull out the media aspects, if you're using multiple forms of media, the oral, the listening, the sound, and the music aspects. So becoming conversant in all of these various literacies helps you become a more effective technologist, a pedagogist, even I would say a librarian, in being able to support these. And now, of course, with AI staying on top of all those trends, recognizes the potential for how you can extend the possible within these projects into new areas. Next, please. Critically important, and you'll be hearing about this, I suspect, next from Sarah. Be conversant in copyright concerns related to media creation. I get asked all the time, can I use this? Can I use that? Well, of course, I'm not an attorney, and even if I was, I'm not your attorney, so I can't tell you definitively whether or not you can or can't do something, but there are fair use, exemptions that we can lean on. And I encourage our students and our faculty to flex their fair use muscles, to be critical, to use media to be critical, to transform the purpose of media, to be transformative, and to really, as importantly, use just as much of media as you need to communicate your key ideas. That compositional aspect is as important to me as the copyright aspects, but there's a number of other considerations. Where are you going to be showing this media, right? And what about fair use? And in our university, we have story blocks, which is licensed materials. I'm sorry, I said fair use, Creative Commons and public domain, and thinking about all the different types of media reuse capabilities in the law. Next, please. Just as important, accessibility. So I am actually a chair of a training group at the Libraries Accessibility Alliance, an intraconsortial organization. I'm a neurodivergent individual with ADHD. Accessibility is a really critically important topic to me, both in terms of my position in terms of the media and personally. Accessibility is a human right, full stop. Beyond that, there are legal and ethical considerations that we should be teaching our students, no matter their modality, whether it's a research paper, a podcast, a video, a virtual reality experience. We have successfully integrated core concepts of accessibility into any time that I work with our faculty, and we provide support services for transcription, for captioning, for example, and we are working on audio description in the not too distant future. That is a very difficult one, but it's not one that we should be forgetting. And of course, thinking about VR and even AI in the not too distant future. Accessibility. Never mind the fact that when students go out into the real world, these are skill sets that are going to be occupationally expected from future employers or graduate school, for example, as well. Next, please. When working with potentially sensitive media project topics, such as identity, social justice, the environment, consider whether the students are interested in gearing their media project towards advocacy angles. So I didn't have time to go into it in this brief presentation, but I have in my book a theoretical framework that I put forth, and at the apex on the potential of media projects, at the apex is action, because action is where you get the most engagement and the most transformative effects for media. So in order to have action, I strongly recommend, where appropriate, considering advocacy while still not necessarily influencing student perspectives. Do not shy away from these pieces and be prepared to offer guidance on how students can amplify their voices to support their causes. I'm not going to get on my soapbox, but we all know that we are in a period right now where students really need to be passionate about their future and the issues that they're facing. And media is extensible. And it is a wonderful platform for students to be able to engage themselves in very important topics that are going to be relevant in their life and to amplify their voices in a way that should be thoughtful, reflective, and responsible. But I can give students the tools to do this. And so I can teach that, and we do. Next, please. Work smarter, not harder. Think of ways such as creating video tutorials to scale up support rather than having to be in every class. So I support, our first year writing at Minnesota has roughly 5,000 students a year, 2,500 students a semester. Each student today, now, as of a couple of years ago, is required to create a media project in their first year writing. I can't meet with all 130 classes a semester when they're all trying to get their media project 3, done in the same 3 weeks at the end of the semester, which started last Friday, by the way. So fun times for me. Try to maintain control of your schedule. Build out support networks for when inquiries are beyond your capacity. So I have an entire apparatus that I've developed of online tutorials, which, by the way, are available to all of you at z.umn.edu/libmedia, that I can direct people to, and they get thousands of hits. I have guides. I have one-on-one counseling. We've developed our media ambassadors. We have developed a number of approaches to be able to support those writing 1301 first year writing students, as well as the other capstone courses that I support across the board. Next, please. Do not cultivate false expectations for your capabilities. Look, going back to identity, I know who I am. So I'm not an animator. I'm not a professional videographer, though I am pretty good at creating video, I would say. I'm not a professional photographer. So if you are not a professional animator, let folks know that who are looking for animation that you're not going to be able to help them. But that's where, go back to those relationships where I do have a relationship with a professional animator on my campus, that if that question comes up as a collegial gesture, they'll help out that student. So it's okay to not know everything or not be a professional media creator, but at least be fluent in the media equipment usage and cultivate the relationships on campus so that you can direct people to the appropriate resources and be able to serve, I would say, at least 85 to 90% of your users with your own and your immediate depth of expertise. Next, please. Always, as I mentioned earlier, media is an ever-changing area right? We started with the lantern slides back in the 1860s libraries, right? Dewey, who I'm not a huge fan of, said, when the photograph can tell as much of a story as the book, the photograph deserves a place on the shelf. Today, in the same hour, just 2 weeks ago, I went from talking about spatial computing in the Apple Vision Pro with occupational therapy folks to tracking down reel-to-reel materials for a Princeton scholar, Buddhist chants, right? So my job has 1 foot in the 60s and 1 foot in 2030. I need to stay on top of these trends, such as XR and spatial computing, which is what Apple calls their VR. And building your long-term vision in your media creation, and along that, your assessment, and always being able to take the pulse of who you are and adapting your identity to that pulse of the moment in a way that is that allows for risk taking, but that is also calculated and responsible in nature. Next, please. So thank you for listening to my talk. My book is Student Created Media, Designing Research, Learning, and Skill Building Experiences. I put down 17 years of my experience developing and managing this program. We've worked with hundreds of classes representing thousands of students spanning campus disciplines in multiple modalities. And with that, I am going to pass it on to Sarah Rachel Benson to talk about copyright. Thank you.
All right, thanks so much. So I am here to talk about 12 tips for copyright management for librarians. I am actually a copyright librarian at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And I do have a law degree and a master's of law and a master's of library and information science. I like to call myself a librarian. Next slide. So first, remind your patrons that you are not a lawyer if you're not, and or that you are not their lawyer. So for me, I am a lawyer, but I often have people offer to pay me under the table if I'll just give them some legal advice. That's not my job, right? I am here as an information professional to give people access to information and resources, just like any other librarian. It's just a specialty area. I always make the analogy, you wouldn't go to a medical library and ask the medical librarian, hey, is this cancer? Look at this, mark I have right here. But for some reason, because I guess you don't assume that they're a doctor, but since I am a lawyer, people tend to try to ask me legal advice. It's really tempting, but don't give out legal advice. Next slide. So focus on access to legal information. So there are a lot of great places to find good legal information, including the United States Copyright Office that has an entire area on AI and artificial intelligence, and the US Patent and Trademark Office, along with the Copyright Office, are going to put out 4 new guides on AI. They've put out one paper about deepfakes, but there's a lot more coming, and they just asked for more time because these issues are very complicated. I participated in some listening sessions with both of those agencies talking about copyright in academic libraries. So I'm very excited to see what they come up with. Next slide. If you can, hire or advocate for hiring a copyright librarian. Having a copyright librarian on campus is really handy. I help everyone from staff, faculty, students, the dean, whoever has a question about copyright. I also liaise with the Office of General Counsel and our Office of Tech Management. It's really useful, right? We know that copyright is prevalent in all aspects of librarianship, from public librarianship to school librarianship to academic librarianship to archives, preservation, etc. So it's really useful to have someone. But if you can't have someone on campus, consider getting someone on retainer when you have some thorny issues and you just really need someone to dig into them. Next slide. So learn about the basic copyright rules, right? Even if you have a copyright librarian, I try to empower everyone on campus to have some basic copyright knowledge. Know that copyright is automatic. You don't have to do anything special. You don't have to put a copyright notice on the work. You don't have to register it with the Copyright Office. Of course, those things are helpful and sometimes very necessary to preserve statutory damages or to sue anyone. If you need to sue someone, you do have to register your work first, but copyright is automatic as soon as the copyrighted item is sufficiently creative work, is fixed in a tangible medium of expression. So it doesn't have to be very creative. It's minimally creative. It doesn't have to be novel. And it just has to be written down, recorded, or all of those photographs on your iPhone. Those all count. Next. So when you operate a library, public, academic, etc., you should have a copyright notice posted near every copy machine or 3D printing machine or book scanning machine. Why? Because you limit your liability. That basically says if people then choose to ignore copyright and say copy an entire book or do something illegal, that is not on the library. It is on the individual patron. And going above and beyond that, I like to have a reminder on those signs that patrons also have fair use rights. And then I usually would like to have a link to a library guide where I explain these things. But you shouldn't have someone standing over the copy machine. If they're open to the public, then having that copyright notice is sufficient. Next slide. Okay, learn about copyright exceptions. A really key exception is the face-to-face teaching exception, where if you're in a classroom face-to-face with students, both the professor and the students have the right to publicly, well, within that classroom, display or perform any work as long as it's from a lawful source. So you can have your students sing a Taylor Swift song. You can have your students act out an entire play that's still under copyright. Why? Because we're learning, right? You can show PowerPoints. What you cannot do is reproduce everything. That doesn't give you free rein to copy everything. It does give you the right to show a full-length movie in class, for instance. Also, remember, we have really important library superpowers under Section 108 of the Copyright Act that allows us to do things like interlibrary loan and use the preservation clauses to make preserve unpublished works and in some cases published works. Next slide. Okay, definitely know your fair use rights and exercise them. If you don't use fair use, you lose it. You can actually create markets for things that you don't want to create a market for, right? So you need to understand the balancing test of fair use and transformativeness. So fair use is not just a four-part test. There's also transformative fair use, where the new use comments on the original work with a new message or meaning. So learn about that, use it, and also check out things that help you, like the ARL Code of Best Practices for Fair Use. Next slide. Okay, so you learned about your fair use rights, then use them. So you might use them for digital library exhibits, you might use them for library guides, you might use them for all sorts of things. But again, once you know what they are, use them. And the ARL Code of Best Practices and Fair Use for libraries, academic libraries, is a really good place to start. It's not legal advice, but it does have kind of a code for how people can operate day to day. Next slide. Okay, so if you're going to get into a large-scale digitization project, unless it involves entirely public domain materials, which is pretty rare, if there are some copyright protected materials, consider meeting with your general counsel's office and copyright specialists before you do it. So, I think we're all pretty familiar at this point that there's been a very big lawsuit that had been going on for a while against the Internet Archive for controlled digital lending, and it didn't go very well for the Internet Archive. So some folks, though, are still engaging in controlled digital lending, and that may be okay, but you would want to make sure that your general counsel's office is aware of what you're doing and it is okay with it. Certainly, I don't think that that decision means that all digital lending is bad. It just is definitely something one would want to consider and read that case carefully and think about what you're doing. Next slide. Advocate for library and archive positive changes to copyright law. So we just had an election and things are going to change pretty quickly. Keep an eye on things, right? So keep an eye on how this might impact libraries and how what types of laws are being proposed. So when the Small Claims Act at the came through Congress, I was there advocating for an exception for libraries, and at first it wasn't sure if we were going to have it, and then we had an opportunity to send comments to the Library of Congress, and we were able to get that exception, and that's a good thing. It allowed us to exercise fair use and do our jobs without fear of being brought to small claims court. Those are the kinds of things where we need to keep up on the law and understand what's going on so that we can advocate for our communities. Next slide. Okay, so engage with different groups and keep on top of things. So the U.S. Copyright Office obviously has alerts. They'll send out, news blasts and things like that. Sign up so that you are always on top of things there. The Copyright First Responders is a wonderful group, and they'll come and train your library about copyright. There's an ACRL copyright discussion group. It's not as robust as I'd like, but it is a group that you can engage with. And I would say, find as many different groups as you can. There's also Copyright X at Harvard, where you can take an entire course on copyright for librarians. And I also teach courses through the ALA on basic copyright, and actually one is coming up very soon. Next slide. Okay, so watch ALA copyright webinars, such as the one by myself about basic copyright. Check out webinars by Ocean, the Open Copyright Education Advisory Network. Ocean copyright webinars are not recorded, specifically so that folks can be open and honest when talking about different things and answering questions, but they are wonderful. And if you see some coming out, I encourage you to register. Next slide. And check out my books at ALA. One of them is an edited collection called Copyright Conversations, and I also have Compact Copyright. I'm actually in the process of writing a new edition of Compact Copyright, so it will have some new chapters, including one on AI and copyright and one on licensing and copyright. So keep an eye out for that. Hopefully the new edition will have it will also have updates to all the other chapters, of course. But the new chapters are really going to be hopefully forward-thinking and helpful to everyone. So our next speaker is, let's see, who is our next speaker? I knew who it was. Oh, it's Rachel Fleming-May. So I'm going to turn it over to her.
Live, but I'm very grateful that you're willing to listen to what I have to say from the past. I'm going to share some tips from Fundamentals of Planning and Assessment for Libraries, a book that I authored with Regina Mays. I'm going to start with some general advice about planning and assessment and move on to more specific tips. So first, take a broad view of stakeholder. Planning and assessment always begins with stakeholders and their priorities. We usually focus, though, on the highest profile stakeholders like administrators, legislators, boards of trustees, but it's really important to think of the needs of all of our stakeholders, even those who don't write the checks. The critical assessment movement reminds us that members of less powerful and marginalized groups are just as important as those who are going to hand down their priorities to us. How are we planning for and meeting the needs of, for example, our student affinity groups on campus, our students who are experiencing food insecurity? Considering how to support the mission, vision, and values of all of our stakeholders is just as important as reflecting the priorities of those of the institution as a whole. Next, look for assessment partners. Assessment is a big job. It requires special expertise. It's time and labor intensive. Fortunately, academic institutions are full of people who design and conduct research, and assessment is a kind of research as one of the primary parts of their job. You should reach out to the experts on your campus to see if they'd be interested in, for example, moderating a focus group for you or reviewing a survey instrument for effectiveness before you distribute it. You offer them co-authorship on a project, they'll likely jump at the chance to work with you. Your institution might also offer tools and support through, for example, your Office of Information Technology or institutional research. Look for what's available, talk to people, search your website, visit offices on campus and see who can help you with your assessment and planning projects. Next, before you even begin your assessment project, it's important to have a plan for what you find out. Those assessment findings should, in turn, inform your future planning efforts as well. In Library Evaluation, a casebook and can-do guide, Danny Wallace and Connie Van Fleet said that asking stakeholders about resources, services, or facilities that you don't have the resources to change or offer is pointless. In other words, don't ask students if they're satisfied with the library's weekend operating hours if you don't have the funds to expand them. Assessment presents an opportunity to publicize your offerings. Asking stakeholders about their needs shows your interests. It generates positive public relations opportunities. It also often informs stakeholders about those offerings themselves. Students might not know that you have a popular fiction collection, for example, until you ask them how often they use it. So keep in mind that publicity and public relations are secondary goals and effects of your planning and assessment efforts. This means that you need to design your assessment in a thoughtful way. This begins with the planning process too. Your planning efforts should include your assessment design. When you're planning to expand or add or change your services, collections or resources or facilities, make sure you think about, how will you determine the effectiveness of those changes? Unless it's absolutely impossible to do so, put your projects through the institutional review process so that you can share your findings more broadly. Pilot test your survey instruments and focus groups and interview protocols, or the list of questions you're going to ask in your focus groups and interviews. This is an essential step that we often give short shrift to. It is time consuming, but you will regret it forever if you distribute a survey without testing it properly and then find that, say, your skip logic doesn't work properly. Take it from one who knows. You want to make sure that you include enough time in your planning process to accommodate testing. Next, moving into some specifics. Talking about the foundations for planning and assessment. Don't rely too much on input and output measures. These are the things that go into a system and come out of a system. These are the kinds of measures, unfortunately, that are almost exclusively requested by organizations and institutions that collect data from us. Our institutional data collection offices and external stakeholders like the Association for Research Libraries, ACRL, the Office of Education, and so on. This is, the money we've spent, the number of books we have in the collection, the number of times those books are checked out over a period, the number of people who come into the library. These are all really important, but they don't really tell us a whole lot about the actual impact of our offerings on our users. Outcomes-based assessment is how you get at that meaningful sort of those stories of impact. Outcomes-based assessment also requires a lot of planning and time and effort to conduct effectively. It's really essential, though, that you incorporate outcomes-based assessment in your planning and assessment portfolio in order to generate that meaningful data. That means it's important to make time for assessment that's actually meaningful to your organization and not just assessment that's mandated by those outside stakeholders. Getting a little bit more specific and talking about specific approaches to collecting assessment data, let's talk a little bit about surveys. Surveys are kind of deceptively simple, or they seem simple, but they're really not, in other words. They give the impression of being easy to build, and in some ways they are. But in order to create a survey that really works and really gets at the information that you need and want, it's important to take the time to do that effectively. Luckily, again, there are people who study effective survey design, strategies for distributing and collecting survey data, for creating samples of your user groups. The literature is full of these sorts of studies that illustrate best practices for conducting surveys, just about anything you can think of. And that's material that's really helpful to tap into. When you're designing a survey, think short and painless. This means the survey itself should not be too long, shouldn't have too many questions, and it shouldn't be too difficult to complete. If your survey is too long, too many questions, but you have a large respondent group, one thing that you might consider doing is dividing your questions into two smaller surveys, Survey A and Survey B, and distributing Survey A to half your respondent group and Survey B to the other half. That can work. Don't ask people to write too many of their responses. Your survey should primarily include multiple choice, Likert, and it is pronounced Likert. I was told that by someone who knew Dr. Likert. True and false questions, not short answer questions. If you do include open response questions, which it's always helpful to do that, but it should be just sparingly few. If you find that you really can't design true, false, short or multiple choice, Likert, etc. questions, and you need to incorporate a large number of open-ended responses, that might be an indicator that you should actually be collecting data through focus groups or one-on-one interviews instead. Speaking of these, they are time and labor intensive, but extremely powerful tools for collecting nuanced feedback from your participants. Some important best practices for conducting focus groups and one-on-one interviews. In addition to testing your protocol, that's the list of questions that you write to work through during your focus group or interview. In addition to that step, there are some other best practices that I want to talk about briefly. First, use a skilled moderator. Again, there are people all over campus who conduct focus groups and interviews as a means for collecting data for their own research. Ask them to assist with your focus group or one-on-one interview. It's best practice to have someone who's not affiliated with the organization conduct the data collection. Similarly, it's best practice to not conduct the focus group or interview in the library. That has the added benefit of, again, showing your interest in your respondent group by going to where they are. Make it easy for them. Conduct your focus groups or interviews in an academic department or the student center or possibly a dorm or other meeting room on campus. Make it easy for them to participate. Acknowledge their time and effort. Even if you're only able to offer snacks for participants in the focus group or interview, it's important to at least do that. Ideally, you'd offer them some other kind of remuneration, but You may not have the funds to make that possible. If your library doesn't have the funds to do that, see if there are any other organizations on campus who might be interested in partnering with you, or have funds that you can tap into to provide a small, gift card acknowledgement. Record your focus groups and interviews. Transcribe those recordings and code your transcripts for themes and findings. This is really important. Don't rely on your memory or on note-taking to generate data. So when you're writing up your assessment results, remember that assessment is always political. Assessment supports the determination of how we're going to allocate resources. Sometimes an assessment multiple audiences. If that's the case, you might need to write up multiple reports. We speak differently within our families than we do to people outside our families, right? So you might want to have one version of your assessment findings that you use internally and one, university administrators and another for other external stakeholders. Know your audience and reflect that audience and their concerns in your assessment write-up. Administrators say they want data, but we're almost moved by stories. It's important to remember that. Give them the data that they request, that they say they need, but incorporate some of those really impactful anecdotes that you elicit from respondents throughout your assessment process. Finally, keep meticulous records. When you can, conduct longitudinal assessments. That is, conduct the same assessment regularly so that you generate longitudinal data and you can show the ways that the library and its services, resources, collections, etc., have changed responses and impressions over time. Those can also inform future efforts. Planning and assessment is something we should think of it as a bracelet, not an unfastened string of beads. It's cyclical. Your plan determines your assessment efforts, which then inform your future plans. You can purchase Fundamentals of Planning and Assessment for Libraries at the ALA store if you're interested in hearing more of Regina's and my musings on the topic. ALA also offers a large number of publications related to planning and assessment as well. I am going to turn the session back over to my colleagues now to wrap things up. Thank you so much for your time and willingness to listen to me speaking to you from the past. Take care.
Great. Thank you all for coming to 72 Tips for Academic Libraries in 72 Minutes. We will now do our Q&A. If the other author presenters would turn their cameras on and their audio on, I will start with our questions from the chat section. And actually, I see that Jamie Santoro, who is one of our editors, has her hand up. So Jamie, if you would like to ask your question, you can do so out loud.
I accidentally put my hand up, so no question here, just a great thank you to everyone who involved. Apologies for the raised hand.
No problem, Jamie. So we'll move on to our next set of questions. Quite a few of you asked about having a copy of the PowerPoint. We can certainly email that, and we will later this week. We'll also post it on one of our websites for you to access it there. And that presentation will include the list of speakers and specialties, which I see that one of you also asked about. Now, our next question is for Megan. Can you talk more about the supplies and materials you use and how you budget for them?
So certainly that's a great question. And I will say this is a question like for the last 8 to 10 years that I get really regularly. So if anybody is really interested, I can send you the digital information. I have it all typed up, ready to go. And believe it or not, we've even written for CNRL News an article about this because we teach so much with copyright, visual literacy, and whatnot with our button makers. So certainly let us know. As far as budgeting, I'm going to be honest. I have no money and no authority in the library. So everything I do, I have to ask for. And that's why assessment is so important. As we have heard, I don't think any of us here didn't say something about assessment. So if you want money to do what you want to do, make sure you're assessing everything you do. That's how we get more money. And as we heard in that last presentation, telling stories, data is data. It's telling stories that people really care about, and that's what really makes us human. So I'm going to encourage that. But in truth, honestly, I just sent a note to our big dean and was approved with not even a thought to spend $2,000 on button supplies that'll last us about 3 years. This is such a powerful, strange, bizarre button making initiative, but it costs us 8 cents to make a button. $8 will make 80 buttons for whatever you want. Whether you're selling copyright, you're selling motivation, it's out there. So anyone who has any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. And I encourage you all, get a button maker. You will not be sorry.
Awesome. Our next set of questions is for Scott. I'd love to hear more about how you're planning to approach audio description, even if it's brief. I was approached by a faculty member about potentially doing so for a published work.
I should have clarified, but this is a great question. We're researching audio description. I don't have an answer that on actual how to do it. However, if you are a public institution, and this is part of my LAA stuff, recognize that the Department of Justice has Title II Level AA regulation, which requires that your pre-recorded media must have audio description, even though it's not easy to do. Level A allowed you to have just a transcript, but level AA, which is what we're under now, requires audio description, which is why I'm researching that capability now. Who knows what's going to happen with the Department of Justice, but that's a conversation for another time.
Maybe a question for today too, because we do have a couple from other attendees about that. But the next one for you, Scott, is do you ever find pushback from faculty, staff, or students when educating on accessibility?
Yes, from 2007 when I began this game to about the mid 2000s until YouTube started coming out with the higher level auto captioning as well as Kaltura. And Kaltura does transcription as well. And then I have students kind of go and clean it up because we don't allow for just auto. Another thing that helped me was that instructors were partnering with local organizations. And I talk about this book, not just to sell the book, but partnering with like the Department of Health and Minnesota Department of Health. Minnesota Department of Health will not put student video projects in their organization without having proper captioning and attribution citations. So media is a little bit different. Most students don't throw their research papers in collaboration with various organizations. So when they want to be able to do that and they get pushback from organizations and they start doing it. And then finally, it doesn't hurt that we provide support if students need it for captioning, transcription, and looking into digital audio.
Awesome. A few people asked Scott for you to post the link. I think you already did that. If you could do that once more, just for those who are still wondering and missed it in the chat, that would be great. Our next question is for Sarah. This person asked, how far away is the new edition of the compact copyright?
Yeah, and that should be, so part of it is on me and part of it is on the publishers, but I believe my edition should be in by, end of spring, early summer. And then I'm thinking by the fall. Fall is usually a good time for new editions, so probably by the fall. In the meantime, my older edition, which is still not terribly old, is still available. So check that one out. And yes, grab the new one when it comes out, hopefully next fall. Thanks for asking.
Okay, here is a question for the full group, and maybe one of you can raise your hand and answer first. What may happen to academic libraries if President Trump makes good on his promise to nuke the Department of Education? No IPEDs, no budget, no college at all. Who wants to share thoughts about that?
I'm really hoping he can't do that. I mean, it's an entire department. How long has it been in existence? It would be hard to dismantle the whole thing. However, I mean, there are a lot of people talking about doomsday at this point because, I mean, how many students rely on it for financial aid? How many institutions rely on it for financial aid? Not to mention that the ALA is also worried about libraries, and how to advocate for libraries under the Trump administration. So, but I'm really hoping he can't do it. That's my wish.
Scott has some thoughts too.
Oh, Megan had her hand up first.
Oh,
No.
go ahead. I was waving at someone walking by my window.
Oh, I thought you were.
I have thoughts, but I'm not sure they're appropriate for this particular
Yeah,
forum, if you know what I mean.
Listen, I think we're going to go back to first of all, Department of Education. If it does get nuked by what's the Doge, right, Mr. Musk. I think a lot of those responsibilities will be set off to others. I think what's going to end up happening ultimately, if they are successful enough, is that especially in publics, we're going to go back to a Gilded Age where people who can afford to go to education, to afford higher ed, will get higher ed. Some of us here are fortunate. A lot of us are in R1s. You know, we am in a blue state. We're fortunate to have reasonable in Minnesota, you know, legislative support. Not that we're, you know, we're always in trouble, but so is everybody else. But no, I do think that basically people can afford it. We're going to be seeking out of state folks. And frankly, even though the immigration is an issue, we're going to be going, setting up bases all over the world, so that we can charge people as much as we can. This is a business. Anybody who doesn't believe that, high academia isn't a business, isn't really paying attention, and we'll go where the money's at. And the people who can afford it will get education. The people who can't will not. Unfortunately, I think if things are successful, I'm not going to go all the way there yet, but we're on our way.
Our next question is actually for Rachel Fleming-May, but some of you may have thoughts in this too. The person asked about opinions on ACRL's project outcomes surveys. Is anybody on this team familiar with that? If not, we'll just ask Rachel later, and she will answer electronically. I see in the Q&A function we have a couple of new questions. One from Mark. I'm curious to hear more about teaching copyright and literacy using buttons. I just received my copy of Megan's The Playful Librarian.
Yay.
Perhaps the full discussion is in that text, question mark.
So I will give the brief and say that I do talk a little bit more about that, but really to give you the gist of it, I am an art librarian, so therefore I work predominantly, I work with visual learners. But one of the things that we really do a lot with our button makers is, listen, students are using visual images more than ever. In fact, I'm a baby of the 70s. As I think I mentioned earlier, I'm turning 50 like in 10 days. So, you know, we didn't have these technological devices. We actually had to physically go to the library. You know, I just think of the experience that I had to have in a college, and I like melt, where I'm sure students are now melting over this digital experience. But in truth, our button makers, they allow us to, they're really the conduit to our teaching. Everyone brings a non-copyright, you know, an image that is completely illegal for them to put onto a button to our events. It's the perfect time to talk about this stuff, and they don't even realize it. And what's beautiful about this in my work, when you're in a playful moment or a creative moment, you know, this is when your stealth teaching is happening, and the students don't even realize they're being educated. And it's a fun way. Yeah, no one ever like listened to my like 20-minute copyright lecture and was like, wow, that was fun. But when they hear me talk about copyright over that button making experience that happens in 60 seconds, we can really talk about a lot of things. And then they ask more questions, and they ask those questions they really want to know. And really with that finding images, it's so important just to think about where people are generally using their everyday materials. So for me, what I love about this is so much arts education that I do. It's really general education that absolutely every discipline needs. There's nothing special about the arts except we touch every discipline. So I think that that's really interesting. But Mark, I'm always happy to answer more questions. Please feel free to reach out. And I do hope you enjoy the book. Thanks for purchasing it.
Great. Our last question for the presenters is directed towards Anne, Sarah, and Zoe. I've been reading the book, The Kind Librarian, Cultivating a Culture of Kindness and Wellbeing in Libraries, which is written by Helen Remmer. Can each of you talk about the role of kindness in your work as it relates to your tips? And that again is for Anne and Zoe.
I'll start off. I talk a little bit, it's not something I've talked about today, at least very much, but I talk about it in my book a little bit with the issue of affect in particular, which is emotion. And emotion is really important for motivation. It ties into the reason we do things. And so we do want to connect with people as human beings. We want to look at them, we want to share our experiences, we want to share our own failings too when we're teaching. We don't want to make it appear perfect all the time. We want to meet people where they are. We want to meet people where their interests are. I think that all might tie into what you're talking about with kindness, but I guess I think about it in terms of emotional connection, really connecting to people. And just in my own practice, I guess, I think that listening is so important. People need to be heard more than anything. And that's always a starting place from where you can really help them rather than just, going off with whatever you think about what they should be knowing or learning or doing, but just listening and hearing their stories, which are really so interesting, and starting from there.
Yeah, I would echo what Anne said. A lot of the work we do on the project and collecting oral histories really comes down to that human connection and building a relationship that is mutually beneficial and is cognizant of how it can be extractive and moving away from that. So yeah, it really does come back to that human connection and listening and a little bit about what I talked about in my presentation of reflecting on and centering your why am I doing this work, and using the resources at your disposal not only to create these more representative collections but to connect with your community and to make sure that the work you're doing is really reflective of your community and their needs and interests.
Thanks, Saul. Our last question is really for the staff. It's whether I think we're going to do another iteration of the 72 Tips program. Again, we certainly hope so because it's been great working with all of you over the last year or so. We started this program in San Diego, and this is our second presentation of it, and we'd certainly like to continue it if interest is sustained in it. We enjoyed having all of you for the program 72 Tips for Academic Libraries in 72 Minutes. Many thanks to all of you in the audience and to our author panelists, Megan Lotz, Anne Medaille, Zoe Maughan, Scott Spicer, Sarah Rachel Benson, and Rachel Fleming-May for your contributions today and in San Diego again. The authors' books can all be found at alastore.ala.org. If you enjoyed this program, we have another one for you tomorrow. It's on homelessness with author Ryan Dowd, also in Zoom. And then in December, we have a program that is on sustainability, comparing African and American perspectives on that topic. You can sign up for either or both of those programs using the registration links at alaeditions.org/book club. Again, that's alaeditions.org/book club. And we'll leave you now with the post show and a wish that you all have a wonderful evening. Take care.